But I think when we get any cyclist who tends to ride at a relatively normal cadence, and especially someone who hasn't even done them before, I think we can just get benefit just by mixing it up. Varying your training is one of the best ways to get stronger. So if you've been riding for 8 years and you've never done these before, try doing them and just see how you feel. If you've always done your tempo intervals in the winter at 90 RPM, try doing them at 60 RPM. It feels a lot harder, and it's probably going to make you stronger. So, and then the other thing is, I think just people who tend to struggle more muscularly. I know for me, this is the case. I lived at 7,000 feet for my whole life, basically. And the first 10 years of my training, that's where I rode. So that was normal to me. So very good aerobic system, but at altitude, you're not able to produce as much power. And so going to lower altitude, it always felt much more taxing on my legs than my cardio. And so it was more a matter of kind of training my muscles than it was my aerobic capacity. So I've seen this with even runners who they don't have the ability to produce torque very well because they have a great VO2 max, really solid FTP, but they're just fall apart because their muscles aren't used to sustaining that torque that you need for cycling. Because with running, really your only resistance is your body weight or, if there's an uphill like the terrain. But with cycling, it's about pushing as big of a gear as possible effectively. If we want to look at Tadej Pogacar, he even shortened his crank length to 165 just because he's so aerobically fit that in order for somebody of his body size to actually be able to push that big of a gear, like you need every advantage you can get.
Yeah, and I think also if, an athlete's wondering or trying to think of an applicable scenario, whether you're a mountain biker, tons of torque in mountain biking. If you're in a road race even and you're coming over the summit and there's those times where you just dig into the pedals and you are absolutely smashing, but you're doing it at, 75, 80 RPM and just hanging on, that type of intense pressure on the pedals, number one, you're going to get stronger from that if you're lifting weights in the gym because the force you create is so much stronger. But if you're used to doing this, what Landry said like 3 times, if you're used to pedaling at 45 RPMs and really digging in on some efforts, those super hard efforts, they just flow better. It's going to be less of a cost against your muscles and you're not going to be as shredded afterwards. So
yeah,
I think at the end of the day, the reason I would say there's no downside to trying this. And if you take a couple blocks of training and just add some lower cadence to, you're not asking yourself to reshuffle everything in your training. Add it to your tempo ride, add it to a day when you go to the gym. I think you're going to really see a difference if you're strength training and you start doing the torque training. You just find some days where you feel like a monster. It's like, what is going on?
It's like the bike just pedals itself pretty much.
It's crazy. Yeah. So deadlifts and torque, those are a delicious combination. What, can you remember when you were looking through, like, are there still a lot of pros doing this that you saw on Strava or guys in your pro athlete analysis?
Yeah, I think it's definitely pretty common to see professional riders doing this kind of training. So there's got to be something to it. If we look at the best riders in the world doing this style of training, there's got to be something to it. And I think it kind of goes back to being able to push your aerobic system as hard as you can with the muscles. You can have a great cardiac system, a great stroke volume, VO2 max, tons of mitochondria. If your muscles can't actually sustain the torque to max out, it's not going to do any good. So you might even find this yourself. Like, when you go hard, do you feel like you're maxed out aerobically or do you feel more challenged muscularly? And I know I've experienced this myself when I've done a lot of torque training and then I start doing 30-15s or VO2 max. It kind of feels in the legs kind of like I'm doing a torque interval. And then I just remind myself, I'm used to this sensation. I can push this kind of a gear.
That's a great example that I should have used for like that digging over the climb, 30-15s, 40-20s, just smashing, laying off the gas, and then having to turn that big gear again. I mean, that is torque. To your point, too, of when you said, hey, if these pros are doing it, there must be something to it. I did a podcast with Grant Holicky, who has a ton of experience, and he had said, even a guy like Steven Seiler will tell you that he'll go in the lab, they'll find something out, and let's use his classic 4x8s that everybody started doing when he the paper or whatever it was out a few years ago. He'll go to these pro teams and say, "Hey, we just found this out in the lab," and they say, "Cool, we've been doing that for a decade." Like, and it's not a diss on him. It's just things in the lab do not lead the training. A lot of times it catches up to what people have
Hmm.
figured out have worked.
Hmm.
And I've always looked to what experienced riders are doing and asked them, okay, how do you execute this? Why do you do it? When do you do it? And then I would try it on my own, and some things work, other things didn't work for me. And that's the I think a huge message to always remember, torque training might not be for you, but there's a lot of people that will be for it. And if you never try it, you're never going to know. So no cost in trying it. I would definitely give it a shot. And yeah, if you do, let us know how it turns out. Do we miss any bullet points on torque training that you want to leave for the people, Landry?
The last thing I would talk about is kind of just improving your efficiency and your overall pedal stroke. If you want to get good at something, it's always good to kind of break it down or slow it down. So, to learn the proper technique, if we look at other sports or like weightlifting, if you want to learn how to do powerlifting or something like that, you always break it down into the simplest components before you string it all together. So, I do find, again, especially for newer cyclists who are really trying to build that efficiency, slowing it down to 50 RPM really allows you to focus on just that smooth pedal stroke. You even can see it. Newer cyclists, you can visibly see that they are less efficient than a more experienced cyclist. And so that's something to really make sure that you nail down early. Before you get too far into your training, you need to make sure that you're pedaling efficiently.